Hello everyone, this is Timothy Mark with Alexandria.
How's everybody doing today? Good, I hope.
And we are a World Paranormal Research Society. Website's worldparanormalresearchsociety.org and the YouTube channel. If you're listening to this on YouTube, you already know it. If you're not, then it's World Paranormal Research Society. Click the like button below and subscribe to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about squares. Is that right?
Magical squares, and really, I'm sort of going to give a tip of the iceberg, kind of a beginning look at a real a gem in medieval magic.
But before we get started with that, I want to tell a joke. There was a little kid who approached the pastor. And he asked the pastor, he said, I want to know everything there is to know about God. How can I do that? The pastor gives him a King James Version Bible, and he says, son, all you have to do is read this from beginning to end, and you'll know all there is to know about God.
Okay.
So I hope people out there got the joke that you cannot learn everything from the King James Version Bible about God. It's just a summary of the truth. It's just an abbreviation, if you will. And so, actually, it's a shame that we've been misled for so long and been lied to for so long, and we don't know the whole truth, the whole biblical stories. Also, now that I got the joke out the way, if you laugh, you laugh. If you didn't think it was funny, you didn't think it was funny. But I'd like to talk about, I was listening to a YouTube video yesterday on Rob Zombie, because I'm a Rob Zombie fan. And I listened to White Zombie when they were out. He was in a band called White Zombie, and I was listening to him, and I got a different perspective on him now, because he does not think that guitarists, bass players, and drummers are worth as much money as the singer. And I guess that would depend on, like for me, I'll put it in perspective. Like if you listen to somebody like Guns N' Roses, okay? When I grew up in the 80s, so Appetite for Destruction came out, I think, in 1986. That time I was 12 years old, and I thought it was awesome. But for me, Guns N' Roses is Duff, Izzy, Slash, and damn, I can't even remember the drummer's name. Steven Adler was the drummer, and Axl Rose. And so I think that's the whole Guns N' Roses band. What Axl did by just replacing the entire band and traveling, he should have just called it Axl Rose instead of Guns N' Roses, because Slash and Steven and Izzy and Duff really made the music. So there you go.
And you touching back on your joke, and I think that really comes into line that we were reading some comments on YouTube on some of our past podcasts. I don't know if you want to touch on that, how sometimes people get confused. You said people get misled, or they're not quite understanding maybe what we're the message that we're trying to get out. And I don't know if you want to go into that comment, or you just want to leave it alone.
I'm gonna leave it alone. Everybody's got their own opinion. People who are brought up talking about who are brought up one way in traditional Christianity. And when I say traditional Christianity, again, traditional Christianity, popular Christianity is not original Christianity. Let's think about that. What does it mean to be a Christian? To be a Christian, it means to be a follower of Christ. If you're going to be a follower of Christ, what did Christ use? What was his Bible? Christ's Bible was the Old Testament Bible. That's what Christ's Bible was. A lot of people, when they wear symbolism for Christianity around their neck, they wear the cross, which represents the sacrifice of Christ for all of our sins, right? Now, does that mean repetitive sins? Does that mean that that Christ died so that you could be forgiven for repetitive sins and intentional sins? Or what did it mean because when Christ was on the cross, he said, forgive them because they know not what they do. But what if you do know what you do? What if you do know that you're sinning? What if you recognize it as a sin? Does that have a whole different meaning? And what symbolism would Christ have had? He was a carpenter, so in my mind, I would think that he would have definitely utilized the Star of David. I think that if he would have wore any symbolism around his neck, necklace-wise, or anything like that, or when he was building things, put up any kind of symbolism, it would have been the Star of David. But people wear crosses, and then a cross is just like a cross represents the item that Christ was hung upon. A crucifix is different from a cross. So a crucifix has a representation of Christ being crucified on the cross. So a crucifix and a cross is two different things. So people really need to watch out with the symbology now. The comment that was made, I just let it go because, I'm not gonna argue with the lady. Hopefully she will read other books, read books that Christ had access to, and understand the Old Testament in a different light than what she was brought up understanding.
And I mean, I'll give you a current example of this. Where we're currently staying, we had an individual that said that they're a Christian, yet they act like a complete hypocrite and is nothing but a gossip mongrel, meaning very backstabbing, very gossip orientated, really not what a true Christian in my mind is. A true Christian is supposed to help people, not judge people, but she certainly is very sarcastic, very rude, condescending, and just likes to spread malicious lies and gossip wherever she goes. So certainly she is a prime example of being a hypocrite Christian. And I mean, I still can't wrap my head around how they say they can be followers of Christ, yet they try and rake people over the coals and stick their nose into what is clearly not their business and to judge people. I find that very, very wrong.
Well, this lady that claims to be a Christian, she the one that we ran into several times, and her attitude towards us is real weird. But if you was to question her anything about Christ, I bet she don't even know it. People like to say, well, I'm a Christian, because they try to put themselves in a higher light. But I doubt she even owns a Bible.
I mean, that's doubtful, and I mean, we're certainly not going to do what she does and judge and shoot our mouth off about her to the public, because that's just not who we are. I mean, we don't judge people. We
just did. I think kind of in a way we
it's
not really judging. It's
we
just
said we didn't
action.
care for her attitude.
Calling us a hypocrite. We're not calling us, but we're calling her a hypocrite
because she really is.
Yeah, but it's and there's a lot of people that's like that. You got to realize a lot of people go to church as a social thing, as a networking thing. A little known fact about me is I ran a charity club for 5 years. I was president of a charity club for 5 years. During that time, I led Bible studies, I led youth groups and things of that nature. And I am a Judeo-Christian, but I have an open mind. And I have an open mind. That's why I can get along with people who have other religious beliefs. And that I recognize the fact that you cannot live and die by the King James Version Bible. And so I do open my mind up to knowledge, and I do read older books than the Bible, and it's a lot of research. I mean, and I get that it's hard for people who were brought up one way. I mean, there's people that are brought up in one way in one little town, let's say just one little town, they live there their whole life, and it's hard for them to change. They've never been anywhere, they never experienced anything, and they're going to live and die in that little town, and their mark that they make on the world or the universe is very small. I think when you're born and you live your life, you should have some type of legacy that you leave behind, or you should have benefited the universe in some kind of way, or try to help people in some kind of way while you are alive.
I'm a very adamant believer in that philosophy, is that we're given this lifetime, this life force to do what we can to make an impact, and whether that be teaching, educating people, doing that's what we hope with our podcast, that we ask you to maybe expand your horizons. And there's a whole wide world out there that if you just allow yourself to embrace the possibilities, you're going to see the world in a whole different light. And I mean, I always advocate on these podcasts, get books. Books are not extinct, folks. I try and collect a whole variety of books. What I'm going to talk to you about today is actually considered a very rare book. And
but before we get into that book and that story, what I want to talk about what you just said. Not just get books, but you should also listen to other people who have different religious beliefs than you, and never think for 1 minute that you know everything that you know about God. Because for those of you Christians out there that are probably like hating me right now, wanting to send me hate mail and stuff like that, what I'll tell you is I am a Judeo-Christian, but I'm going to put forth a question to you, and I'm going to answer the question at the end of this podcast. Why was Jesus baptized? Now hurry up and run and go get your Bible. And when we open up the phone lines at some point next month, and we start having callers actually can call in during our show. You can call in and do that. We can debate some things if you want, but it's a simple question. Why was Jesus baptized?
So that's something that I'm not familiar with that answer. So I would have.
We talked about it several times.
Exactly, but I mean, I don't want to spoil it for the people out there. So I don't want to really let the cat out of the
Here's
bag
the thing.
kind of thing.
I've asked Baptist preachers why Jesus was baptized, and every Baptist preacher I've ever asked that question to has gave me the wrong answer. And it's not my word against their word; it's Jesus' word, and that answer is in the Bible. So I'm not giving one answer different than what Jesus gave, but yet these pastors are giving answers different than what Jesus gave, and I don't understand why.
And you know, one thing that I can really say is that Timothy is highly knowledgeable on the Bible, and I appreciate that he is actually expanding my horizons, and I'm learning something on the Bible, and I think it's just great. And I encourage everybody to, all the topics that we bring to you, learn more about these topics, get different sources, and really, the more you can learn about different traditions, religious civilizations, will only better you and will enable you to look at situations with a really open mind. And I think if you go into any situation with an open mind, the avenue for you to be highly successful is only on a positive vein.
Yeah, exactly. And, you can't be successful if you think you know everything. And that's one of the things, I don't know if anybody out there watches the Shark Tank, but if you watch the Shark Tank, which is Mark Cuban, Damon Johns, I think, and then, what's the bald-headed guy?
Kevin O'Reilly.
Mr. Wonderful. Kevin O'Leary.
Oh, yeah, Mr. Wonderful.
Yeah, Mr. Wonderful. And then you got Lori. I don't know her last name either. And then you got the other guy who, I don't know his name. But anyway, it's a good show. I don't know their name right now off the top of my head, but I like watching it. And one of the things that you can learn from them is even the billionaires that sit up there on that thing, and there's only 2 of them that are actually billionaires, I believe. No, 3 of them that are billionaires. But out of the 3 billionaires that sit up there on the panel, they even say that they're open to learning and open to knowledge. And so, you take someone from small town USA or small town Canada or small town wherever you're from, Australia or Germany, and you think that you know everything and you've been nowhere and you've experienced nothing. And I mean, it's never too late to change your life around and start opening up possibilities. Even if you can't go to a far off place, you can go to a place that's outside of your comfort zone and stay there for a few days and try to see how you can live.
I think until you take, it takes great courage to take a step out of your comfort zone, and even if you have to do it in baby steps, once you allow yourself that freedom to step out of your comfort zone, you are going to notice a huge difference on how you view the world, everyday life, your surroundings. And the saying is, what you put into the universe is going to come back at you. That is absolutely true, and something that everybody should practice each and every day, because if you're negative and you surround yourself by negativity, that's what's just going to be, you're a magnet for negativity. And
I'd like to say too, we did another podcast, the last podcast we did with a lady who experiments with drugs. We do not, well, she said it during the show that she uses cannabis, and she said that she uses DMT and stuff of that nature. She said that. And so we have nothing against those people that choose to do that kind of experimentation and stuff like that, especially with DMT. We do not condone the use of any drugs. We're not telling anybody to go use any drug. We do not condone that. We do not promote it. But she brought it out during our interview, And she's very interesting podcast, actually. It was a very good podcast, but I just wanted people out there to know that we do not condone the use of drugs.
Okay, that's like you're just putting a little disclaimer out there,
Yeah.
so everybody's aware. I mean, these podcasts, we want everybody to know that too, that they're unscripted, and we just speak off the cuff. This is just how we are. You know, we're up close, we're personal. We may say things that offend people, but we can't worry about that because we truly hope that you glean some new knowledge from the podcast, the topics. We're going to have a guest coming up in the next little while that lives a truly heathen lifestyle. So I really have learned a lot from her. So I'm looking forward to having her on the podcast and expressing her lifestyle to all of you. And it's just a way that we're trying to bring the possibilities to all of you out there, that, you know, you've got to step outside that little comfort zone. We may inspire you just to jump off that fence a little bit and to experiment with different knowledge, different techniques, different rituals, different religious beliefs. So it's really up to you on how far you want to take your spiritual journey, and the only person that's going to really stop you is you.
And so to wrap that up, what we're saying is get off your mother's titty, get off your grandma's titty, whatever titty you own, get off of it, because it's time for you to come into your own, learn things on your own. It's very highly likely that your mom, dad, grandpa, grandma, great-grandpa, whatever, have told you something that's not even in the Bible, or that's not even something that's meaningful to anything that God has said or did. But so has anybody heard of the term "you're a square"? Or when you think of square, what do you think of? Somebody that don't drink or smoke or something like that. That's a square, right?
Straight-laced person. But you know, when you talk about squares, you're talking about nerds, or that's another name for a nerd, or somebody that's just very logical and just is not a fun person to be around. When I went to school, a square was somebody that was a nerd, and you kind of stayed 1,000 miles away because they weren't part of the in group.
Yeah, but a nerd is probably the coolest person to hang around with, that you're going to learn the most information from on very different topics. And so in actuality, it doesn't seem like it when you're a kid, because I was definitely in a different crowd as well. In the 80s, I was one of the headbanger kids, you know, listening to metal and had all the buttons and the patches on his jacket. But looking back, you know, the nerds are the ones that, man, they're educational, their knowledge and stuff like that. They are cool. So, but the reason why I brought up squares is because you're going to actually be talking about different types of squares.
Yeah, and then we can acute, everybody talks about, I don't know, I mean, I had one of these growing up, is a Rubik's Cube, and that novelty of the Rubik's Cube is technically a magical square. I don't know how many of you out there could actually solve the Rubik's Cube. I think I got maybe 2 or 3 sides. I couldn't get it. And there was a few people that I knew in school that actually could solve the Rubik's Cube, and that's considered a magical square. I don't know if you knew that. Did you have a Rubik's Cube?
Yeah, I had a Rubik's Cube, and I could solve it, but it would take me like 3 or 4 days to solve it. And I won a lot of money off of that little Rubik's Cube because as a teenager, you look for ways. Like, I know my granddad, he worked at a textile mill. His name was James Browning, and his nickname was the Mule because he worked so hard. He worked 40 years at a textile mill, and worked his ass off for 40 years at the same mill. And he'd go to work. He'd wake up at 4 o'clock every morning, be at work at 6 o'clock, get home at 2:30, only had a 30-minute lunch, and then at 3:30 we'd be doing landscaping and yard maintenance because he owned a landscaping company. And so he was a hard-working man, and I forget what the question was, where we were going.
We're talking about magical cubes and stuff like that.
No, yeah, Rubik's Cubes. And
yeah.
So as a teenager, you know, I'd make money with my granddad, and I'd make a lot of money with my granddad. Actually, I was surprised how much money he actually gave me to work in the business, but he considered me a partner because, you know, as a kid, I'd really do a lot of work. But he... what I'd do with the kids at school is I'd take a Rubik's Cube and I'd tell them, hey, in 10 minutes I'll have this thing solved, and I bet you $20. And in the 80s, that was a lot of money. Now when I say that, I'd say that, okay, now we'd put it in detail, like all the colors would be where all the colors would be on one side of the cube, right? Like, you know, you have your yellow, your orange, green, all that or red on the same side. that's supposed to be on. So I just removed the stickers, and so I made a lot of money that way. And there was a lot of kids out there who just wasn't hip to the fact of what I was doing, and they keep paying me the $20 bills to do this.
That's pretty ingenious to have that thought process to remove and to reallocate the stickers. That's quite ingenious. So that's the early stages, I think, of an entrepreneur, I would say. Is that
well, yeah,
manipulate?
I was also an entrepreneur with my granddad, just doing the landscaping things, and I think I really want to start a landscaping company again in his name, and I got a 20-year-old son, so I'd probably like to try to put him in it in some kind of capacity or another. But if he don't like getting off the couch to play video games, then he probably wouldn't do it. If they had video games back in that time, which they didn't. So the fun thing for me was actually going out there and cutting grass. We was talking about that yesterday. The smell of cut grass.
I said to Timothy, since a child, I've loved the smell of freshly cut grass, and I thought if they could bottle that into some kind of a liquid or infusion, I'm telling you, that would just brighten my day. That would be almost like having a tonic of a cure for depression, any kind of a bad mood, is that you open this tiny little glass bottle and it smells like freshly cut grass. I mean, that would be $1 billion ingenious idea, but unfortunately I don't think it would stay fresh unless anybody can invent some kind of infusion to keep it from going stale.
Yeah, and before we get started on the topic today, I want to say one more thing. I was I like looking up things on YouTube, and one of the things I looked up was Hellraiser. I was looking up horror films, actually, because I'm an 80s kid. So preteen and teen years was in the 80s again, like I said. But the guy that played...
was it Pinhead?
Yeah, the guy that played Pinhead, he was actually replaced because he was so cocky, he didn't want to work with Dimension Films no more. The guy that was doing Hellraiser Judgment Day, he couldn't believe that the guy was going to help Dimension make another film. He didn't like the producers, so the guy just replaced him. Now, they had been friends for like 25 years, and now they're not friends anymore. But that's a business decision, and I think that when it comes to business, you got to be very careful about who said it. Who said it? I think it was Nikki Sixx that said it from Motley Crue. He said, as kids, it sounds good. You're in high school and you want to start a band together. And so no, it was Rob Zombie, actually. He said, you go off and you start a band, and then the money comes into the equation. And then you're splitting like 1/4 of the money, which he got greedy. He didn't want to do. So that's why he started his own solo thing. He don't give his bandmates the 1/4, or he don't split it equally. He takes the lion's share of it. But and so when it comes to business, greed can definitely be there and have an effect on. Give you a perfect example. No, I'm going to leave. Go ahead. No, I don't want to do that.
Why not?
I don't want to tell that story. There's
wow,
stories
that's
I don't
unusual.
want to tell because
okay.
I just decide not to tell stories because
well.
it hurts people's feelings.
Oh, well, it wouldn't hurt my feelings. It's about me.
It's not about you. It's about somebody else, and I know that person's going to be listening to the podcast, and I do not want to open up any old wounds. But yeah, I'd say definitely when it comes to business, it's not in your best interest to work with family or friends. But and I'm talking about like extended family, like your parents or your
okay. Well,
uncles
sometimes they
and
can
aunts.
raise havoc because greed can come into place, and everybody wants their 15 minutes of fame. So I could see where in my family it may pose some problems. It could create a family rift. So I can really see that.
Okay, so now the topic that you're about to get into right now. Let me see this right here. What you got right here? So you're going to be talking about sacred magic.
Yeah, before I go into that, I just want to touch into sort of dissect and give everybody a layman's explanation on what a magical square or a magic square is. And in recreational mathematics, a magical square is really an n times n square grid. And that is where n is the number of cells on each side of the square. And it's filled with distinct positive integers in the range of 1, 2, and so on and so on. So the sum is called the magic constant, or magical sum of the magical square. And a square grid with the n cells on each side is said to have the order n. So that's sort of in recreational mathematics. And in school, mathematics was not my top subject. I barely passed it, and it wasn't something that I was fascinated about. But magic squares are also called normal magic squares, and really in the sense that they are non-normal magical squares with index of not restricted to 1, 2, etc. So magic squares really have a long history, dating back to at least 650 BC in China, and at various times they have acquired magical or even mythical significance and have appeared as symbols in many, many works of arts. And in modern times they have been sort of more generalized in a number of ways, including using extra or different constraints, multiplying instead of adding cells, using alternate shapes or more than 2 dimensions, and actually replacing numbers with shapes, and the addition of geometric operations, and very, very different. And again, magic squares that have order 3 to 9 actually appear in an encyclopedia from Baghdad, and that is circa 983, and it's the encyclopedia of Brethren of Purity. And simpler magic squares were also known to several early Arab mathematicians. So that's and China again, legends dating back as early as 650 BC tell the story of Lo Shao, or scroll of the river Lo. And according to this legend, there was at one time in ancient China a huge flood, and I don't know if they're making reference to the biblical flood, but ancient China had a huge flood.
Hold on for 1 second. Now, the biblical flood, I'm just going to insert here. The biblical flood was something that encompassed the whole world. Now, only the repopulation could have wrote about it, which would have been repopulation would have been an offspring of Noah. But go ahead.
Yeah, this is just a legend in ancient China, so I just thought,
No, it's probably true.
That they're referencing...
They're probably referencing the storm that took out, that rained for 40 days and 40 nights, the storm, the flood of Noah. Yeah.
Right, that's what they said. In ancient China, there was a legend about a huge flood, and while the great king Yu, and it's spelled Y-U, was trying to channel the water out to sea. So he was trying to push the water out to sea, and a turtle emerged from it with a curious pattern on the shell. So this turtle had this really funky pattern on its shell, and it was a 3x3 grid in which circular dots of numbers were arranged, and such that the sum of the numbers in each row, column, and diagonal was the same. So each row, whether column or diagonal, was the same, 15. And according to the legend, thereafter people were able to use this pattern in a certain way to control the river and protect themselves from floods. So
then this may not have been the flood if they actually did not get flooded, because this may have not been the flood of Noah, because the flood of Noah flooded the entire world, and the only people that survived was Noah and his family. So if in that story the people from China, but that's not to say there wasn't another flood.
Right.
It's just not another flood that encompassed the whole world. But go ahead.
Exactly. So the Lo Shou square, as the magic square on the turtle shell is called, is the unique normal magical square of the order of 3, in which 1 is at the bottom and 2 is in the upper right corner. And every normal magical square of the order of 3 is obtained from the Lo Shou by rotation or reflection. So I think that's very, very interesting in regards to early mathematics and everything to do with magical squares. So there's even a reference of magical squares in Persia. So we jump from ancient China into Persia, and I'm just giving you a little bit of history on different civilizations that used magical square. And although the early history of magical squares in Persia is really not truly known, it has been suggested that they were known in pre-Islamic times. It is clear, however, that the study of magic squares were quite common in medieval Islam in Persia, and it was thought to have begun after the introduction of chess into the region. And I always considered the game of chess is playing a magical square game. I don't know. I mean, I've played chess and checkers as a child. I really love the game of chess and checkers. And that truly is, you're actually playing a magical square game without realizing it.
What about, like you said, there's chess, magical square game, there's checkers, and there's Stratego.
Right. So, I mean, these are modern versions of an old idea of the magical square. So, I bet you never thought of that before. And it's really, it says that in Persia, that's where the introduction of chess into that particular area. And in the 10th century, Persian mathematician Bunjai, for example, left a manuscript that on page 33 contained a series of magical squares filled by numbers in arithmetic progression in such a way that the sums of each row, column, and diagonal again are equal. So very, very fascinating. Also in Arabia, magical squares were known to Islamic mathematicians in Arabia as early as the 7th century. And they may have learnt about them when the Arabs came into contact with Indian culture and learned Indian astronomy and mathematics, including other aspects of combinational mathematics. And alternatively, the idea may have come to them from China. So that's another way of thinking that it may have come from China. So really, absolutely fascinating. And again, now we made a reference to Indian. We jump to now India. And it says that the 3x3 magic square has been a part of rituals in India since Vedic times and is still used today. Very, very fascinating. And just as an example of that, the Cumbria column, a magic square of order of 3, is commonly painted on the floors in India. So in India, they have a magical square in the order of 3 that is painted on floors. And it really is essentially the same as the Lo Cho square from China, but they've added 19 with 19 added to each number, giving it a magic constant of 72. Really, really fascinating of India, and it goes more. I could go more into India and the magical square, but it's just absolutely fascinating on how these particular cultures thought of magical squares. We're kind of going to jump now into Europe, and it said around 1315, building on the work of the Arab Ali Bundy, Greek Byzantine scholar Manuel Moscolopoulos wrote a mathematical treatise on the subject of magical squares, leaving out the mysticism of his predecessors, while he gave a kind of a method for odd square and 2 methods of even squares. So absolutely fascinating that it was brought to Europe. That's their insight. And absolutely, and there's another one here that goes more into Europe and all the magical squares. But now what I'm going to touch on too, and what I wanted to bring to the forefront of all of you. I mean, we could go forever in the day in regards to magical squares, and I'm going to kind of leave that out. Did you even know that in Faust. I don't know if any of you know anything about Faust. There's a witch's spell that used to make a youth elixir, and it also in the sense of fountain of youth for Faust. There's a construction of magical squares.
Hold on, when you say Faust, just so people out there can understand if they're not hearing you correctly, can you spell that for the people?
Faust. We call it Faust.
Okay, yeah, I know.
That's the pronunciation of Faust.
I just wanted people who wanted to research it, they can just get their spelling of it. That's all.
Oh, because I'm a Canadian.
No, I'm not saying that. Like, I understood what you were saying. Like, you said it right to me, but I'm saying if there's people out there listening that may not know, and that's why I just wanted you to spell it for them.
Oh, I appreciate that. So that's sort of an insight on how the beginning of magical squares have started. So if you notice about a lot of the topics that we bring to you from these podcasts is that they have very ancient beginnings and how they've been molded and how they're incorporated in everyday lives. Different cultures, in today's society we have Rubik's Cubes, we have checkers, we have chess, we have all these particular games now that incorporate magical squares. So very, very fascinating. And today what I'm going to speak to you about is I'm in possession, I'm actually quite lucky to have a copy of this very, very rare book. And it's really the book of Abra, Melin, and it really tells the story of an Egyptian mage and sage. Mage is we call a gifted individual who taught a system of magic to Abraham of Worms. And Abraham of Worms was a German Jew who was presumed to have lived from 1362 to 1458. And Abraham was able, during his lifetime, to really travel widely around different areas. He did go to Egypt, he did go to various locations in Europe, and he actually had the great privilege of meeting with many sorcerers, magicians, and Kabbalistic, and some of the greatest of them who was the man whose teachings were recorded in this particular book. And it's also key in Hermetic studies. I know I've mentioned a lot to you in regards to Hermetic studies, but really I find the sacred magic of Abra, Melin, the Mage absolutely it's an astounding book. And it says that the book that it was translated, and it was translated really from original Hebrew into French, and then they translated from the French into English, and is actually stored in Paris. And it's as delivered by Abraham the Jew onto his son Lachem in AD 1458. So very, very instrumental into bringing sacred magic. And a lot of the book goes into his teaching and the operations in regards to sacred magic. And it really is this book. I was very surprised when I was able to get a copy of this book. And before I go into some of the magical squares and their meaning, is that this book refers to God over and over again. So Abra Melin was very, very religious, and God has made reference into this. And he really does give a heed or a warning in this book in regards to what you need to do prior to doing any of these magical squares. And just like we tell you in all of our podcasts, any kind of magical spiritual works, you really have to prepare yourself. You do your meditation, your grounding techniques. Really protect yourself, because you're dealing with a lot of highly powerful, potent magic, and you really have to go into it with the proper, again I keep mentioning, intent. And you really have to have a clear state of mind, and your mental facilities must be clear and not clouded by anything, because really you could be going into uncharted territories in regards to what kind of things that you're dealing with. And I've had a few people in the past say that they consider me a dabbler, and I don't get offended by that term, because it's really coming from an individual that is maybe uneducated in what we do. So
hold on, let me just break in there. You're definitely not a dabbler. Alexandria is definitely a professional at what she does. There's people out there who use the term dabbler to mean as an insult because they don't understand what we do. I know that, for me personally, I've been doing the paranormal stuff for 10 years. Alexandria's been in the world for a lot longer than I have. And she's definitely very intelligent and knowledgeable on a lot of things, and I've learned a lot from her. So she's not a dabbler. She's definitely a professional. So for the people out there that want to use the term dabbler when they don't know who we are or what we've done, basically I'll give you a huge fuck you and just don't listen to our shit.
I mean, I really don't think that as an insult. It's just an uneducated person that has nothing better to do than to criticize what people do. I mean, I've been doing this for over 30 plus years. You know, it's something that I practice each and every day. It is a lifestyle, and like I said, I'm open to other people's opinions, their techniques. So I would never, you know, when you're working in the world of spirit, you would never have that intent on degrading what somebody else does, their methods, their rituals. Very, very highly unprofessional. So I find that very derogatory, and that really changes the intent on which you work your magic. So that's just only going to be destructing what you're doing. And I find this fascinating that Abra, Melin the Mage, this book about the sacred magic and the sacred squares, really quotes Moses a lot, and through his journey in Egypt and meeting all these powerful sorcerers, magicians, he goes to say that the wisdom that he's trying to give to his son Lachem, when it was translated, is that Moses learned the same wisdom in the desert from the burning bush, and he taught it unto Aaron his brother, Joseph, Samuel, David, Solomon, Elijah, and the apostles, and St. John particularly, from which we hold a most, you know, there's a book of prophecy in regards to St. John. I don't know, Timothy may be able to elaborate on if St. John had a book of prophecy or not, but he's just wanting to share the science, the wisdom, and the magic. So, and he does quote the Kabbalah quite a bit in regards to the magical squares. So he really went on to a journey onto all these different cultures, and that's what we try and take you on these podcasts, is a journey to explore the unknown. We may be fearful of the unknown to make that step, but the unknown really has untapped resources of energy. And he goes into, when he goes prior to in these magical squares, things that we should consider before we undertake any magical operation. So he goes into that divine wisdom magic, and really having all, as I say, intent. And you know, everybody should be able to how you want to use your magic and for the proper purposes. And also he also considers the age, the quality of the person who wisheth to undertake the operation of the magic. So he really gives you an insight, or it's really an owner's manual or a how-to book on how to approach magic and magical squares. And he also says that the greater number of magical books are false and vain. So he's really giving you a warning out there that there's a lot of things that are false and vain. So again, we like to express in our podcast, don't take one source as complete word or law, because there's many different opinions, many different approaches, and if you can incorporate that into what you're trying to do, it's very, very important. And again, something else that he mentions is that there's always specific times of the day, the month, and the hours in which magical operations are to be done correctly. And also he mentions the Sabbath, the Passover, and the Feast of the Tabernacle. So really he goes into specific about the Passover and what days magical operations, because we always know, a lot of you out there that are practitioners will know that you certainly, there's full moons, blood moons that, are highly more charged for whatever specific magic that you're trying to incorporate. He also incorporates planetary hours and all the, other signs from the stars that are very important when your planets aligning. We all know that there's different planets that align, and also what kind of moons incorporated. And then he goes into about cleansing yourself, preparing yourself. Your clothes should be clean as well. And so I find this very, very insightful, and it gives me a really in-depth look into medieval magic. And I mean, there's ancient magic, medieval magic, modern magic, dark magic, white magic, different categories. And then he goes into selecting your specific place on doing your magical operations. Place is very important. We all know you're not going to be doing a magical operation where it's like people coming in and out, there's noise. It should be a quiet, secluded place, somewhere where you can feel really in tune with the divine, and a place where you can really just let yourself go, and a small contained room. He also, there's different tools that you need to make sure that you have all your preparation. People use altars. All of you out there may use altar, may use different crystals. And he starts going into conjuring and the specific ways on how you want to invoke and conjuring. And we may go into a podcast on how the dangers or the how-to of conjuring and invoking spirits, because a lot of people will base their knowledge or what's going on with movies, TV shows, where it makes it hip in regards to, I can think of one movie that I really like is The Craft, where they conjure Minot. And Minot, you have to be very specific, intent, and I think they at the end of the movie you'll see where conjuring Minot really didn't work to their advantage. So you really have to know what you're getting into and prepare yourself in regards to these magical operations.
What about the genie in the bottle? Ain't that like a conjuring too? If you think back to Aladdin, I know I'm making a little joke here.
No, but it's true. You're touching on fact.
Yeah, because people rub a lantern. I always thought it was a metaphor, if you will, or something like that, of somebody rubbing a lantern and up comes a male genie. But we do know that when women rub something, up comes something. But anyway, I don't want to get on off on that. But just go ahead. Where are you at now?
Well, basically, I've sort of lost my train of. Another show that brings to mind is I Dream of Jeannie. I love that TV show. Yeah. She was a female one, and I thought, wow, if I could be a genie and look like that, I thought, holy shit, that would be an awesome occupation. But shows like that, the jinn is also, you're conjuring a jinn. There's movies that have been about the jinn, very evil. But I Dream of Jeannie, they've really glamorized a subject. That's a conjuration, but these spirits that you could conjure up may not always be that glamorous.
Well, I give you a different meaning of conjuring too. Like you think conjuring spirits and stuff, but if you go to the mountains of China, there's these monks that live up in the Shaolin monks, and they conjure up their inner badass. And I think that they're probably a true Shaolin monk. There is no American Shaolin. A true Chinese Shaolin monk cannot be defeated in hand-to-hand combat.
And on that subject, we're going to go back into the magical squares. But genies, jinns. That's just another conjuring invocation. I call on the elements when I do my magical work. So very, very important. In this book of Abra, Melin the Mage as well, he actually goes into conjuring of different spirits, and then he also breaks it down into the 4 princes and superior spirits. And you may be saying, why is she bringing this into the topic of magical squares? Very, very important that you're aware that there are good spirits, angelic spirits, and there are also demons and evil spirits. And I'm not going to go into this any further other than to tell you that the 4 princes that he mentions in his book of sacred magic are Lucifer, Leviathan, Satan, and Belial. So you may know how to.
Well, let me touch upon that being a biblical. Again, I want to touch on. I'm a Judeo-Christian. I know y'all probably tired of hearing that. So I'm a biblical. I consider myself a biblical expert. And now what you're doing is you brought up a word. One of the podcasts before, I said you're not supposed to draw an image of what's in heaven, hell, or the sea. And when that's put into the Bible, it means that you're not supposed to draw an image of God, Satan. And when people say the sea, well, what they saying? Well, what's in the sea? Like we know Satan and God, but she just brought up Leviathan. Leviathan is the mystery monster that we don't know.
Okay.
And it's credited with being the monster of the Bermuda Triangle and bringing down many ships throughout the ocean, not just there.
Okay, but since you're a scholar, like, have you heard these reference that he has in his book that they call the four princes? So does that make sense to you in a biblical?
No, I don't, because Lucifer and Satan to me is the same.
Okay.
And Leviathan. So here would be the three things that you're not supposed to draw an image of: be God, Satan, and Leviathan.
So you're saying that Lucifer and Leviathan are different or the same?
To me, and I'm going on my biblical research. When I say biblical, I'm talking about Judeo-Christian studies. And people might say, well, you just said fuck you a while ago, so you're not a Judeo-Christian. Guess what? I'm not a turn-the-cheek Christian. So for all you traditional, popular, accepted in society Christians, you can go ahead and turn the other cheek. For me, you hit me on one side of the cheek, I'm not turning the other cheek. I'm not a turn-the-cheek Christian. I'm a Judeo-Christian. Judeo-Christian is a warrior. It's somebody who's a warrior for God. And so, but I am open-minded. I am interested in learning why he separated Lucifer from Satan in that. So I will study it.
Yeah, because he goes further into, like I said, I'm not going to go into more of this. I mean, those are the four princes, and then he goes into the 8 sub-princes, and then he breaks down the spirits that are common onto these 4 sub-princes, and the names of these particular demonic entities are huge. Like, there's pages, and then the spirits that answer to these entities are it's just huge. And he has...
Yeah, he's got a lot of stuff down there, but
and he mentions him as well.
Yeah, Beelzebub.
And that's who answers to him, their names. So it's quite interesting that he's giving you these names prior to actually starting your magical work with the magical squares. And once you listen,
once you conjure anything in a magical ceremony, if you conjure an angel, or you conjure a demon, or you conjure a spirit, something's going to happen.
Exactly, but this is sort of a warning of what you could conjure, and he gave you a list to all these servants of these particular individuals, and he makes it quite clear before he even shows you how to devise these magical squares.
For those people that don't like us saying he and she out there, who's his name again?
Abra, Melin the Mage.
Okay, that's who we're referring to when we say he.
So the book that I'm referring about is Abra, Melin the Mage, and his book on sacred medieval magic. And he does stress, in conversing with spirits, either good or evil, never employ words which you do not understand, because even so, they will have shame or they will hurt you. So very, very important, even when you're spell casting, don't use words you don't understand. Don't use words of demons or angels if you don't know what they're capable of doing. So do your research. Very, very important. And he does go into familiar spirits, and he also makes known that prior to getting into any kind of magical work, you must be as pure as possible, whether body, cleanliness, or anything like that, prior to working with any of these spirits. So sleep is very important. How you eat is very important. The fixed intention of community, everything is very important. So what I've been telling you in the past, that it's very, very, these are tools and keys that have been since the beginning of time, prior to doing any kind of magical work. And then he goes into all these warning and everything to heed, and then he goes straight into the magical squares. And magical squares, in my mind, brings to mind the keys of Solomon, and Solomon used sigils, magical sigils. These are just magical squares, and he goes into the formulations of different things that you want to conjure, and I'll make sure there's a magical square.
Because you just talked about seagulls, right?
King Solomon's, it's spelled S-I-G-I-L.
From time to time, people might hear this sound on the podcast, right? But that's just me moving around. And one of the things that Alexandria gave me that I do wear is one of the seagulls. It was in King Solomon's temple, and I wear it on my chain around my neck. And it has the seagull, and then it has separately the Star of David.
And the seagull that he does wear is the Angel Gabriel's seagull. So that is a seagull that is exclusive to the Angel Gabriel. So look up exactly who Angel Gabriel is in biblical terms, and it'll give you why Timothy wears it. But very, very beautiful seagull. There's a lot of seagulls out there. There's a lot of symbolism. And as an example, he goes into all the squares, and that one particular square is to obtain information concerning and to be enlightened upon all sorts of prepositions and all doubtful sciences. So he goes into the wording that is used to construct these magical symbols, because these magical symbols they do not have numbers in it, they have names in it. So that is the big difference in regards to the names. And he also goes into magical squares that will cause any spirit to appear, and they can take any form, such as a man, animal, or bird. And then he gives you examples. I'll go into, if you want to have a spirit to appear in the form of a serpent, he gives you the example. And one of the words that is used in the magical square is the angel Uriel. So Uriel is used. That's just one of the combinations. I'm not going to spoil it. You have to find these squares on your own. And if you want to make a spirit appear to you in the form of any animal in this particular magical square, one of the words in the magical square is Lucifer. So very, very important. And then he goes into different classifications of squares. He uses the term familiar. If you're not aware what the term familiar, people that are witches or warlocks or whatever, or deal with different magical entities, many of you have familiars. And a familiar is a spirit that helps you in your magical work. It could be an animal. A lot of people have cats, dogs, wolves, different kind of familiars. So these magical squares are very, very important. And there's magical squares that transform animals into men and men into animals. So these symbols actually have been around for a long period of time. And he also gives you magical squares to cause hail, snow, rain, and thunder. And again, these magical squares do not have numeric value like I've told you about China and all these ones. These have names of spiritual entities. So that is the important and then he goes into a lot of these symbols. He dissects that the symbols in these chapters, they can be manifested partly by angels and evil spirits. So magical squares, he actually gives you very warning into actually necromancy, magical operations, and all these different things. So very, very important. I find this book is a really turning point on medieval magic and magical squares, and it gives a different look, a different perspective, and that's how I look onto my magical journey. Is that I'm able to grasp on different perspective, different belief systems, and again, I've learned about magical squares and that have numerical value, and then magical squares in regards that have specific angelic and demonic names to conjure.
Also, look at King Solomon's temple. Okay, and why do you think the square? Because the square is one of the symbols of the Masons.
Square and compass, yes.
Square and compass. But why do you? What does a square do? What does a square do? People know the tool square, but the name gives away what it does. It makes everything square. Make sure that you're building a square. If you look at King Solomon's temple, there was a lot of squares in that temple, a lot of square design in that temple, which is why the square is very relevant and a very, very relevant symbol for the Masons. The Knights Templar, that's what they used. They used squares when they were constructing stuff. So square was thought of to be something very spiritual. That shape's very spiritual. Has a very close meaning to God.
And what Abra, Melin the Mage is trying to get across in this book?
It sounds like you just said watermelon. See, it's getting
Abra, Melin the Mage.
No, I know what you said, but
Melin.
With the sun been shining, I've been wanting some watermelon here lately. But go ahead.
Abra, Melin the Mage actually has said that these magical squares that he speaks out in this medieval magical book that he's trying to pass on the knowledge to his son Lachem in 1458 was brought down from Moses when he spoke to God. So that's what he's trying to get across. And then he traveled to Egypt, he traveled to all these different places, and he's saying that the knowledge of these particular conjurations were said to be brought from God. So he, stumbled on this particular knowledge. This knowledge, he stresses in the book, that can be used by angelic and demonic forces. And very, very important that you know the difference. He even has a magical square to cause comedies, opera, and every kind of music and dances to appear. And then he gives you the wording in regards to this. And again, he's very insightful in regards to God passing judgment on people that improperly perform these operations in regards to magical square. So again, preparation is very, very important. He gives prayer and praise to God in regards to his commandments, and telling people that they should have a very good heart and live happy and contented on the earth with this particular knowledge. So you looked like you were going to add something in regards to God and God's judgment.
No, I'm just breathing heavy. Right now I'm breathing heavy. I'll tell you why I'm breathing heavy. Right now I'm doing push-ups in between this podcast thing. So, but, I'm doing it because I'm on a mission. But that's why I'm breathing heavy right now. But go ahead.
Very, very important. So I hope that this was insightful in regards to sacred magic and magical squares. This is one, I'm completely fascinated. This actually was translated by S.L. McGregor Matthews in 1897. So this is a rare copy of sacred manuscripts in regards to magical squares.
One thing I can say about Alexandria, she's got a lot of rare old books. And I would like to see, if you're interested in taking any classes from Alexandria or learning anything, you want her to help you in any kind of way or anything, all you got to do is email us at World Paranormal Research Society.org. So email us there and contact us. And not that's the website.
You've been working out too hard.
Yeah. All right, so it's World Paranormal Research Society at gmail.com is the email. Email us and address it to Alexandria and say that you're interested in taking classes from her or whatever, and we can sign you up and tutor you or whatever you want to do.
Because, what we want to do is that we want to bring you topics that kind of chart unknown frontiers, and we want to speak about different topics. And again, for anybody that's a study or likes to learn about the occult and different religions, we hope that these topics will expand, and it'll give you the courage to step out of your comfort zone and not simply be a dabbler, but be a student of secret and hidden knowledge that truly is out there if you care to look for it.
I can tell you, we're only going to teach people that are serious. If we feel like that this is something that you cannot use properly, because there is an interview process, so if we feel like there's something that you're not going to utilize properly, or you may do things with it that we're not approving of, then we're not going to teach you. So we give you, let's say you got 11 ingredients in a recipe. We give you 8 on the podcast of the 11 ingredients. And if you want to learn the other 3, then you have to talk with us. So Well, specifically Alexandria, because she is the expert. She is the professional. And there you go.
So, again, if you have any comments or any ideas for guests and stuff, drop us a line. We'd like to hear from you. Like I said, I have in the past done workshops and classes on Druidism. So, the classes that will be available, we'll let you know in the near future, because these will be very serious classes on very serious topics. And if you're just going to be somebody that's going to be a dabbler, or you're not going to take seriously, this isn't for you, folks.
And we got an event coming up next Friday. I'm not going to release the name of the place until probably Monday or Tuesday. But and that's because it's a very, I don't know, it's we can only get so many people in there, and so we're going to release the name of the place next Monday or Tuesday.
But it will be an event where rune readings will be done. I mean, it's going to be very tight. We can only have so many people. I know usually when I do rune readings, there's lineups. We can't accommodate everybody.
But we can reserve a spot for you through our Gmail, and you can go ahead and email us, World Paranormal Research Society at gmail.com, to reserve your spot. And we're going to release the name of the place next Monday or Tuesday. So
and we'll be selling also red brick dust there, and we'll be also selling books. So that's your opportunity to get an autographed copy of a book, or the unique, our unique concoction of red brick dust. The only place that you'll get it.
So, there you go. See you next time.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.